Present Hawk. Join me in welcoming our speaker, Heather Penney.
That day started out totally ordinary and every day. I got up that morning, put on my flight suit, ate my Cheerios, kissed my dog goodbye. And when I got in my truck to drive to base that morning, it was a spectacular blue day. Much like today, a perfect summer September day. Not a cloud in the sky. But I wasn't going to be flying. I had called the tape the night before. In the fighter squadron, we had an answering machine and it had the next day's flying schedule on it. And I wasn't. I had a day full of meetings and paperwork and my inbox. See, we'd just gotten back from Red Flag, so I had a lot of office work to catch up on. Red Flag, as you may know, is the Air Force's premier big war exercise. It's down at Nellis, on the Nellis bombing ranges, and we were spinning up so we could go to Northern Watch for it. So we went down to Red Flag, and I was so excited because I was a brand new wingman. And this was my first opportunity to do a large force employment exercise. In the weeks that led up before we got to Red Flag, I would spend hours studying in the vault, practicing my intercept pacing in our simulators, and I even had a big map of the Nellis Ranges taped to my dining room wall, and I would study it as I ate my dinner and for the hours before I would go to bed. When we got to Red Flag, it was everything I had hoped it would be. I shot 2 MiGs, got to call the kills in the air-to-air debrief, and even dropped real bombs. Okay, well, they weren't real bombs because they didn't have explosives on them. Even in training and even at Red Flag, we don't fly around with live explosive weapons. But still, it was a laser-guided bomb with a real guidance kit on it. Actually released it, was able to guide it in and shack the target. And then you crank, and you're switching over to air mode, and then you come on out. It was fabulous. It was everything that I'd hoped Red Flag could be. I mean, the planning was kind of crazy because we had all of these other squadrons we had to coordinate with. I mean, we were putting so many airplanes into one piece of sky. As a young lieutenant, it was mind-boggling, but it was fantastic. And I thrived on sort of the chaotic frenzy of the planning and getting all those aircraft up in the air at the same time from the takeoff, but then when you're getting ready to push out a student gap and you could feel your blood get hot and your teeth get sharp. It was spectacular. So we had been spending months getting ready for Red Flag. So when we got home that Saturday, the guys really hadn't been with their families that much. Our traditionals, our part-timers, had taken a lot of time off of work. So our boss gave us Monday off, and of course, was very liberal in granting leave. So when we came back home on that Tuesday, came back to work on that Tuesday, it was really a skeleton kind of crew. We only had enough pilots to send 3 jets, down to the Air Force Dare County Ranges in North Carolina. And of course, I was stuck sitting in a scheduling meeting. I was sitting there looking out the window, just daydreaming, so jealous of the bully flight. Bully flight, the lead was Lou Shooter Campbell, number 2 was Eric Puck Hagenson, and number 3 was Billy Hutchison. They were going down to the Dare County Ranges, not with the big bombs that we'd had down at Red Flag, but with the little 33-pound BDU, 33-pound white phosphorus charge. It kind of goes plink, but it makes a little smoke when it hits the bombing range. They're going to go do basic surface attack, dropping dumb bombs for fun, for quarters really. It's like comfort food for fighter pilots. And I know a quarter can't buy you much nowadays, but it does buy you bragging rights. I was just jealous as heck. And we're sitting in this meeting looking at who do we have available to fly that week? What instructor pilots do we have? We're stripping the jets clean, so we're moving from doing our opposed surface attack where we have external fuel tanks and tracks of TERS and all these things loaded up on the jet so we can go fight our way into bad guy land, drop our bombs, and fight our way back out. But now we're going to slick up the jets because we're going to go dogfight. It was going to be a pretty good week, at least when Wednesday came and I got on the flying schedule. When a knock came on the door, and one of our enlisted troops, Dave Chunks Callahan, just opens up the door and barges in, and we're like, what's this going on? And he says, an aircraft just flew into the World Trade Center. And we looked at each other and we said, okay. We figured it had to be one of those light general aviation, like a Cessna 172, you know, the kind that ferry tourists up and down the Hudson River. And we looked outside, it was spectacularly blue. And as the crow flies, New York's not that far away from DC, and we normally share fairly similar weather patterns. So we didn't take it too seriously. We made a few inappropriate and morbid jokes and got back to work. About 15 minutes later, Chunks didn't even knock when he opened up the door. Another aircraft flew into the other World Trade Center. It was on purpose. We immediately got up and went to the bar where we saw what everyone else saw that morning. We have to get airborne. We have to protect. But we're not an Air Defense Alert Squadron. And to make matters even more complicated, we're a National Guard unit. We don't belong to NORAD or the 1st Air Force. And even if they knew that they had fighters there on Andrews Air Force Base, they probably wouldn't even know how to find our phone number. And we're not an alert squadron. So we don't have live missiles loaded on the jets. We don't have jets hot-cocked and ready to go. All of our munitions are way off in the bomb dump, way behind the family camp and the fishing lake and the golf course. So we've got two problems. We've got to get an authorization to launch, and we have to get missiles. But we wouldn't get those missiles in time. The leadership is starting to congregate around the operations desk. Our wing commander, General David Worley, came down from the wing building. He's trying to push the chain of command. He's trying to reach up as far as he possibly can. But as the DC Guard, we've got even additional problems because we don't belong to a state. Our civilian chain of command isn't a governor like Utah's. Our civilian chain of command also is not the DC mayor. In the meantime, we've also got Phil Dog Thompson. He was our supervisor of flying that day, our adult supervision, if you will. Dog's the soft. He had this big, fluffy Vietnam mustache, and he went to weapons school in F-4s. He just had tons of good, old-fashioned common sense. Dog's on the phone. He's calling air traffic control, trying to figure out what's going on in the airspace. Dan Raisin Kane, our weapons officer, our lead tactical instructor pilot for the squadron, is also on the phone. He's calling down to our weapons, our bomb dump, where we keep all of our weapons and our munitions. Can you imagine being that enlisted troop? You're, again, way off in La La Land, far behind the camp, far behind the fishing lake, far behind the golf course. And you get this call from the major. And it's Raisin, he says, I need you to build me up some 9 mics. No, real missiles, live missiles. Yes, guidance kits, explosives, fuses, motors, everything, yes. Get as many as you can and get them to the flight line now. Could you imagine what it was like to be that enlisted troop? I mean, let's get real. This is the military, the world's largest bureaucracy. We don't do anything without a paper trail. And here Raisin's calling up saying, hey, build me some missiles and bring them on down. It's a true testament to his leadership and to our leadership's willingness to allow him to take that risk of loading live weapons without authorization, without the paperwork, without the air tasking order. Dogs now calling down to the Dare County ranges. Tell the bullies to come home and tell them to Buster. Get back here as fast as we can. Sass is on the phone now. He's our director of operations. So he is the squadron commander when the squadron commander, a part-timer, is gone. Sass is on the phone. He's trying to get a hold of the tower. If he can get a hold of the air traffic and tower, maybe he can find how to get to the president. You see, the Secret Service owns the airfield on Andrews Air Force Base whenever a VIP takes off or lands. So SAS is trying to see if we can get a hold of the Secret Service, maybe through them we can get the authorization to launch. About this time, the Pentagon is hit. But it would still be more than half an hour before we had the authorization to launch. The radio crackles. It's Bully 2. Puck, another lieutenant and another wingman, number 2 that had gotten to go down to the Dare County ranges, well, he had run himself out of gas. He was bingo fuel. Because, let's be honest, Afterburner fixes a lot of problems. And so he gotten kicked out by number 1 and sent back home early. So Puck's calling up on the radio. Guard soft, Bully 2. Dog picks up the microphone. Bully 2, guard soft, go. Guard soft, Bully 2, air traffic control, center's not gonna let me into the airspace. Don't you worry about that, Bully 2. You just keep on coming home, I'll fix this. Dog gets on the phone, he calls Washington Center. He's one of ours, let him in. A few minutes later, Puck calls back again. Guard soft, Bully 2. Guard soft, Bully 2, go. Soft, center's now asking if I've got any missiles or weapons on board. Bully 2, guard soft. Don't you worry about that. You just keep on coming home. It wasn't until weeks later that I was able to actually listen to Puck's tapes. And as Puck is coming in, as he's approaching the airfield at Andrews, he's dialing up the ATIS. Now, ATIS, the Aerodrome Terminal Information System, is a recorded voice loop that gives you information about what's going on at the airfield. The landing runway, what the winds are, what the barometric pressure is. It's kind of just a broadcast information that pilots need to know, and it decreases the workload for the tower controllers. So you call in with the alphanumeric code as a shorthand to let the controllers know, hey, I got the info, I know what's going on. So as Puck is approaching Andrews, he dials in our ATIS freak, and this is what it said. Andrews Air Force Base is closed. Washington Class Bravo airspace is closed. Any aircraft attempting to enter Washington Class Bravo airspace will be shot down. Puck comes in and he lands. And at about this time is when we finally get the authorization from Cheney. Aren't there fighters at Andrews? somebody get them airborne. The bullies, 1 and 2, they have been coming back home in full military power, everything but afterburner. They're actually beginning to enter the airspace. Dog gets on the radio. Bully 1, how much you got? Shooter probably has about 600 pounds of fuel. Well below minimum fuel, well below emergency fuel. He doesn't have enough. But Billy's got about 800 pounds. They come in, they land, they're taxiing back, and Dog says, all right, we've been talking with air traffic control, Billy. We think there's at least another one inbound. You have just enough fuel for one pass. They think it's coming down low over the river. Now, Sass and I, we have already started running. Sass, as soon as we got the authorization, goes, Raisin, you and Igor wait until you get missiles. Lucky, you're coming with me. Let's go. I'm running down the hallway after Sass to our life support. It's down the hallway, and it's where we keep all of our flight gear, right? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, don't forget anything. Helmet, checklist, DTC, lineup card, my helmet bag, harness, and I'm zipping up my G-suit when Sass looks at me and says, I'll ram the cockpit. I knew that I would take out the tail. People have asked me, who ordered you to ram the jet? No one did. Our orders were to protect and defend. We had authorization to launch. But we didn't have missiles yet. We wouldn't get them in time, and we couldn't wait for them. All we had on board were 105 rounds of lead-nosed training bullets, not even the high explosive incendiary rounds that we take to war. And between the two of us, 210 bullets wasn't going to do much to a jetliner. I'm running after Sass back down the hallway, out the door, over the sidewalk, and I distinctly remember, first of all, he was outrunning me. And he's an old major. To be fair, I was handicapped. My life support and all of my gear was probably about half my weight, so I did have a handicap. But the sky, which is the light breeze coming out of the southwest, and how it dappled down through the trees onto the grass. And we get to the flight line, and Sass runs up, and he grabs the very first jet on the flight line, and I grab the one that's right next to him. Now, I'm a young lieutenant, I'm a young wingman, I just earned my combat mission ready status several months before, and I am going to do it right. If any point in my life it mattered, it was now. And as a pilot, you know, when you deviate from your checklists, when you break your habit patterns, that's when things start to go wrong. So I run up to my crew chief, and I shake his hand, and I grab the 781 forms, and I'm looking through the forms, and I look up, and Sass is already in the jet. He looks down at me and goes, Lucky, what the hell are you doing? Get in the damn jet! I don't have time for checklists. I don't have time for procedures. I have to make up something for which I had never been trained. I need to use my own knowledge of aircraft systems to improvise something that I'd never been trained for, to scramble. I clamber up the ladder, my crew chief just pulls the ladder away. He doesn't even bother to follow me up and buckle me in like he normally does. And I'm sitting there, I go, okay, batteries on, JFIS star 2, 20% to idle. Watch the RPM, watch the temperature, 40%, less than 750. Sec check, EPU check. Pull the chocks, pull the chocks. Sass is starting to taxi. My crew chief pulls the chocks. I was ready to jump him in afterburner. I'm right after him. My crew chief is still plugged in with his comm cord. He's plugged into my jet. He's running underneath me as he's pulling the pins out of my gear, out of my external fuel tanks, out of my turrets, out of my chaff and flare boxes. He says, Godspeed, and pulls his comm cord. I follow Sass left down Echo for a rolling takeoff on runway 1 right, and we take off, spread wide, and searching low. over the Pennsylvania countryside. We went out maybe 100 miles and never found anything. Sass calls Ranch House, and we turn back to the Capitol to set up a combat air patrol. We were no heroes that day. Sass and I were mission failures. The passengers on Flight 93 are the true heroes. In the time since that clear moon morning, I've come to realize that heroism isn't something unique or possessed by only a chosen few. What Sass and I were willing to do that day, what we were prepared to do, to take off on a mission, knowing that if we were successful, hoping that we would be successful, that we would not return. Any one of us would have been willing to do the same thing. And as veterans, you know that. Why? Because there are things in this world more important than ourselves. Freedom, the Constitution, mom, apple pie, baseball. Those things that make us uniquely American. We all belong to something greater than ourselves. And it is this thing, this idea, this nation called America. And you know this, you all have served. Any one of us would have been willing to do the same thing. So Sass and I weren't special. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, or but here's what is special. What is totally inspiring. When I think back to 9/11, is all of those who, unlike us, hadn't raised their right hand, but still gave their all. The passengers on Flight 93, think of them for a moment. When they got up that morning and boarded their flight, they were just going on a business trip, coming home from vacation, going to see grandma. But when the terrorists took charge of the aircraft, they made the deliberate decision to attack the terrorists, fight their way into the cockpit, seize the controls to deliberately crash the airliner into the ground in order to protect our nation's capital. They were just like you and me. Those of us who have served in the military forces know that our services are comprised of perfectly ordinary, everyday Americans. We come from every walk of life, from every corner of America. We're every creed, every kind, every religion. But what we do when we come together to this band of brotherhood, this wonderful fraternity, we are united for a greater purpose. And you know this because you've lived this. So not only was what we did that day and really what we were willing to do not special, it's actually very ordinary and everyday. We saw it in the passengers on Flight 93, and the first responders, the firefighters, the police officers who rushed into the smoke and the debris of the falling buildings, not out. Think of the workers who every day since then went to ground zero, knowing that the work of cleaning up the towers would slowly and surely kill them, but they were making the choice to do that anyways in order to enable our nation to come together, to heal, and to rise up out of those ashes. So we all belong to this wonderful thing that is so much greater than ourselves. When I think of those heroes of that day, realizing that they're perfectly ordinary and everyday citizens, I realize that we all have that inner hero inside of us. So why wait for a national crisis like 9/11 to bring those heroes out? Don't we need those heroes every day? One thing I'm particularly grateful for is, as the Southern Utah Veterans Home brought me here, they allowed me and facilitated the opportunity to go speak to our young people, to middle school and to high schools. And it's important to know that the generation that's coming after us, that they have that heroism in them too. There are few World War II vets with us left, the greatest generation. And truly, that generation, again, every single American, every single one, from every corner, was engaged in saving the free world from fascism. Truly and very literally they did, and it took all of us. Which is why we call them the greatest generation. But we had another greatest generation, those who answered the call for Korea, and those who answered the call for Vietnam, and those mighty warriors who battled the Soviet Union in proxy wars and deterrence, and saved us from World War III. And those who went to the Desert Storm, and those who are still serving today and have been through the grueling operational tempo that we've seen in the Middle East. The greatest generation isn't dying with our World War II fathers and mothers. The greatest generation lives on in each and every one of us. That heroism, that service, that selflessness, that bravery, that purpose lives on in each and every one of us. It's in our DNA. It's our legacy. It's the legacy that was handed down to us from our forefathers and that we will hand down to the generations that come after us. When I talk to the kids today, I talk to them about how I think of heroism. You can think of heroism as comprised of three primary qualities: bravery, service, and belonging. And as you know, having been through combat, you know that bravery isn't the absence of fear. You know that fear is your constant companion. Bravery is acting in the face of fear, doing what needs to be done, doing our duty despite our fears. And we have to be able to do that in order to serve, because service is our duty. And when I talk about service, I don't necessarily mean military service, although clearly that's the path that I chose. And I certainly don't mean, although volunteerism in our communities is important as well, but what I mean by service is living with the understanding that there are things in this world that are more important than ourselves, that we all have a greater purpose. And then finally, belonging. That it's important for us to get out of our phones, especially for our youngest generation, and actually connect with our neighbors, with our communities, with our families. As many of you know, what enabled you to be courageous and heroic in combat was the fact that you belonged to your squad and you weren't going to let those boys down. That belonging, that brotherhood, those relationships are actual connections with each other. Lower our barriers to service and to bravery. It makes it easier to be brave. If you talk to a recipient of the Medal of Honor, they were just doing their job. They're incredibly humble. They don't think that what they did was special or particularly heroic. But we know that it was. When I talk to the students today, I encourage them to think about how can they live our legacy as we pass that heritage to them. That the most important way for them to honor those who have gone before, those who have served before, is to live that kind of heroism. And maybe not the kind of Hollywood scenes, war scenes where you have big explosions and all of that, but the daily heroism, the daily practice of bravery, of overcoming their fears, even if their fears are internal, even if their fears are about self-doubt or the fear of failure. That if they can develop the practice of overcoming their fears, of not allowing that to rule their life, that they can strengthen their aptitude for bravery. And that they need to think of service, of a purpose outside of themselves. Now, I have teenagers. I know this is a challenge. They're really great girls. But in order to be able to connect with that greater purpose, that service before self, and then finally to connect, to create community, for these kids to put their phones down and actually connect with whoever is around them. And that connection isn't about who's a cool kid and who can I sit with at the lunch table or who's in my club, but connect with everyone. Because we build community through our differences, not in spite of them. And through shared purpose, we can create common ground. If you think about the days that followed 9/11, you may remember the incredible connection that we all had. How people were kinder to each other. How they recognized you on the street, stopped to ask you how you were doing. That we were more deliberate and mindful about how we connected with each other. And now fast forward to today, where our cultivated social media and the news media. We are bombarded by angry, hateful rhetoric designed to divide, not unite. There is a machine out there that is making money on sensationalism, on anger, on hate, and on fear. And we have to say no. And realize that we are all in this together. Because if we allow those outlets, those pundits, those politicos to truly divide us, how can any hero come from that? When I raise my right hand, as all of you did, we didn't swear an oath to protect and defend only those who looked like us, acted like us, voted like us, believed like us. We swore to protect and defend our Constitution and our nation. And that means everyone. We need to begin living like that again. Because here's the wonderful thing when we begin to realize that we're all in this together, that we share something more important, more precious in common than any of our small differences. When we do that, it's like being back in your group, back in your squad, back in your platoon. The connection becomes so much stronger and so much more important than our differences. And it actually lowers our barriers of bravery and service. These things are not unique. They're not special. They're inside each and every one of us. And when the need comes, we know that next generation, they'll answer the call, just like we did. I hope that it doesn't take another national crisis for the next generation, or even those of us today, to reconnect with that spirit of service before self, with that sense of belonging, with that sense of purpose, with our inner hero, or even just connect with each other. Because if we practice these things on a daily basis, that's what truly changes our world. I am so humbled to be here today, to have been able to chat with each of you, to hear just a small amount of your stories. I could have listened to you all day long. I hope that sharing my story with you today has given you faith and hope on what, on 9/11 and these commemorations, can sometimes lean towards tragedy and trauma and grief. And although, yes, that was there, I feel that to truly honor the spirit of Patriot Day and the legacy of those on 9/11 who gave their lives is to every day seek to practice the connection with our inner hero, to be our best self, to serve others, and connect with others. I'll tell you one last story of when I was a young girl. I had figured out pretty early that as long as I kept my mouth shut and didn't touch anything, I could follow my dad just about anywhere. And he would sometimes take me to the fighter squadron. I loved going into the mission planning room with the big maps and the pictures of all the jets on the walls. But this time we didn't go into the mission planning room. He took me out on the flight line, and I was so excited maybe I'd get to sit in an F4. Nope. We turned down the flight line, and we're walking in front of the hangars. And one of the hangars, the door's wide open. And it's a Phantom, which just was mean and fast looking, just sitting there on the ground. You know what I mean. The panels were all pulled off. It was going through a phase inspection. The maintainers and the crew chiefs were banging and whizzing and doing their fixing things. And my dad stood me in front of the hangar and didn't point me to the flight line, but he pointed me into the hangar. And he said, "You know what, sweetheart? I want you to know that you don't fly that jet. Those boys do. You just point it in the right direction." He was teaching me something so much more than the simple relationship between a pilot and their maintainers. It was about everything that goes on before us and how much that matters. And know that your service is like those crew chiefs and like those maintainers, building a solid foundation. Something strong, something fast, something real for the next generation to point in the right direction. As I think back to that day, I still don't think that what Sass and I did was anything special, what we were doing was anything special. But my understanding of 9/11 and my understanding of the next generation is very different. I hope that you know that you have done well. I hope that you know that your service has mattered, that your legacy and that your DNA and what you have done is not forgotten. We will never forget you. We will always remember you. And your service, your sacrifice will live on in us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heather. What a wonderful job. Thank you for giving us that detailed description from your perspective of that day. I'm sure that's something that many of us couldn't understand before, so thank you for that. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your message, and thank you for your example. We would like to present you with the same gift that we've given each of our previous speakers. It's a framed flag. And it has Southern United Home at the bottom.
Thank you.